Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 10 cheat sheet. I just wanted to flag that, and I'm sure people have noticed, just based on the background from last video, but I am indeed on vacation, so over the next 2 weeks, I really hope that the content's going to be delivered on time, and then it's going to be as good as ever, but there will be sort of time lags because I'm in a different continent trying to make sure that I still watch all the Premier League games. But for example, I'm recording the videos today before the EFL Cup matches have played, so do keep that in mind. If there are any sort of injury impacts, I will try to reflect that within the edit of the video. But that's just what needs are kind of are as it stands. But let's just jump into the cheat sheet. If you've never seen the cheat sheet series before, it's effectively a tier list of all sorts of players in all sorts of prices in FPL, and it's really just a look at medium to long term how good these players are. Not just the next three fixtures that you can actually see on the graphic, but actually going beyond that, right? How good are these players as a whole? How their underlying stats are sort of moving along, what their minutes are like, whether I'm aware of any sort of tactical changes or impending fixture runs, that kind of thing that would change our evaluations of a player, or even for example, how good they're doing on DefCon or how good their team is doing on DefCon. But yeah, that's going to be the cheat sheet. Let's just jump into it. As I said, all the stats as ever within these videos, when you look at NPXG, XAG, and some of the DefCon numbers, whether it's CBIT for the midfielders or let's say just CBIT for the defenders, you can find them all within the Opta Stats tool within Fantasy Football Hub. The link is in the description below, and I believe they still have a 50% off offer right now and a sort of win your mini league or get your money back deal in place. So do have a look at that. In the midfield, I think Lefebvre and Florentino get to join this list. I don't think it's some sort of exclusive hallowed list. I think these are all players that are decent, but just produce a little bit more on the surface compared to someone like a Josh King who I've just removed. I know Smith Rowe has an injury, so that actually means that Josh King has a pretty good likelihood of starting the next match. But just something to mention, right? I think the key thing and why people might be reacting to, why is Dewsbury Hall still at the top here? I think when you look at a game like the Everton match versus Tottenham, yes, of course, it was extremely one-sided in terms of the result, but actually in terms of the chances created for a relatively poor Dewsbury Hall game, you can kind of see the values of what someone can do as a set-piece taker who's also playing in relatively advanced positions, right? So I think we're talking about chances of actually getting, let's say, potentially a goal, right? And just being within goal-scoring opportunities. We're also talking about just the set-piece threat and then maybe also the bonus impacts, and it can come with that. As we've seen this season, players who are actually really involved within set pieces because of the overwhelming strength of set pieces within the league, I think tend to actually get bonus more often than not. So later down the list, you'll actually see someone like Mbemo. And I think the big pro for someone like Mbemo is he actually takes set pieces. So he also gets that little cushion in terms of how he's going to get max bonus within certain game instances where, let's say, Bruno doesn't do anything. Within Dewsbury Hall's case, I think he's kind of competing with Garner. But I think whilst Garner's better at DEFCON, the nice thing that's a pro for Dewsbury Hall is I think he's still more of the sort of attacking threat as well. They both have a proclivity to getting yellow cards, but as you can see sort of reflected within the XAG per 90 so far, I think Dewsbury Hall is actually a very solid pick. Granit Xhaka is kind of a bit of an all-rounder because he actually does get the DEFCON. Longstaff, a little bit worse for DEFCON, quite similar to Dewsbury Hall, but I think the big thing is that Everton's fixture run just looks better than Leeds to me. So I've given Longstaff an increase, but I don't think he's necessarily better, for example, than Dewsbury Hall, just because he's got slightly better DEFCON chances. He's still at a tier or almost at a range where I don't think he's actually getting enough DEFCON percentage as a hit rate. So I don't think that means he's inherently more valuable. Lefebvre I've actually added because his minutes have really impressed me as of late. My concern at the start of the season was with these Enzo Lefebvre subs. I think we even saw him getting subbed on for Adingra. Wasn't starting every single match, but now he's sort of in that range of playing 74 to 90 minutes per game. And I think that's actually almost exactly where his minutes lie, right? He either gets subbed off for Sunderland to almost push on and make some changes to win the game, or he plays the full match in a way that's really beneficial as a penalty taker of the team. He's like the only penalty taker in this list here. So that's quite improved. That's quite massive. But I think my only concern with him is whether there is still the chance that he can be subbed off in certain instances. Whereas I feel like with the other players in this list, you almost feel like they're absolutely nailed. With Florentino, I've added him because the DEFCON hit rate is just fantastic. There really is almost no other value towards Florentino. If anything, he's actually, once again, going to be a yellow card magnet, so just something to think about. With Garner, similar sort of circumstances. I think he's just a bit worse than Dewsbury Hall in terms of the threat piece, which is why I have him a little bit lower. Plus, of course, we're also still seeing that, let's say, Garner and both Dewsbury Hall at times could be prone to a slightly earlier substitution around 80 minutes. In the next tier is just Anderson. I probably actually might even drop him in the future, but right now the DEFCON numbers are still quite good for him. And, when you compare, let's say, to Xhaka, for example, he's still producing some XAG per 90, and he still has some decent threat in terms of he's actually trying to get shots off within certain matches. But I think, of course, with Sean coming in, the impact is going to be whether that actually worsens his numbers, whether it worsens like the overall attacking impact of someone within this Nottingham Forest team. And I think that could be something that's not really beneficial towards Henderson. In the next year, I've actually dropped Caicedo. And part of this is actually just simply because I think Caicedo is someone who, as we sort of foretold, with the amount of price rises he's gotten, he's almost pushed himself over towards a tier where you think you're expecting a little bit more consistent threat in terms of just purely not scoring, let's say, one long shot banger a match. And of course, he's done a couple of those this season already. But I think as someone who might mostly have his value coming from DEFCON, at 5.8, I think it's probably a bit of a stretch, considering that even though Chelsea have some good games in 11 and 12, but he's probably not someone who's going to be the main benefactor of that being a bit more of a one-sided game, as that also sort of worsens his potential chance of getting DEFCON. Chelsea had a lot of the ball, for example, over Sunderland, even though they didn't actually produce many chances, and that's kind of why you can see a circumstance where Caicedo doesn't actually get the DEFCON, which works counterintuitively to actually wanting to get hauls from someone like Caicedo at this moment in time. In the next year, I've also dropped Palhinha and Paqueta. With Palhinha, I think it's just a case of his main value is once again DEFCON, and there are other players within the game at that sort of 5 million range who can probably produce something similar. Now, because Palhinha has also scored some goals, it's actually the case that he's one of the sort of top 10 scoring midfielders within the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think he's a top 10 midfielder going forward. So I kind of feel like for the same reasons as to why Caicedo is dropping, I'm giving Palhinha a drop. Paqueta is getting a drop because the DEFCON rate just isn't good enough right now. And I think that comes down to positioning, right? And how Nuno is playing this team out. So with Paqueta playing a little bit more advanced, I think that just reduces the chance for him to get DEFCON. If he was actually just playing midfield the whole time and was actually part of the pivot, I think you'd see a much more easier opportunity for Paqueta to do this. Like he got, I think, DEFCON versus Arsenal, which is going to be always a very difficult circumstance because you have much less control of the game. He probably is naturally just operating deeper within sort of matches which are that tough. And so if you're thinking about nicer games for West Ham, as we've seen so far, where Paqueta has also blanked and actually not come close to hitting that DEFCON threshold, I think that's the kind of value that I'm getting towards, where we're not really seeing that. But still, at the end of the day, he is a penalty taker. So is he still a relatively easy hold for Newcastle at home and Burnley at home? I think absolutely. But you still have the opportunity, in my opinion, to push up to better players. And that's sort of what I'm suggesting here. In the next tier, we've got Minte, Dango, Mitoma. I've added Dango into the list. I don't think there's really a need to talk about Reinders within the previous. I think we're all well aware of why Reinders is not so interesting right now, especially just because of the minutes piece of Reinders. And even, for example, the propensity for him to actually play defensive mid like he did in previous match, that's actually not good because he's not someone who is amazing at ball recoveries, right? Rodri only really worked previously when we were looking at some of the numbers in his past because his ball recovery numbers as a midfielder were absolutely world class. As far as, let's say, just going back to Dango, I feel like Brentford are moving towards the stage and structure where they feel like they're quite comfortable playing the sort of front three as opposed to the front two, which they've sort of trialed a couple times and even played, I think, at least 3 times this season. I think versus Fulham, versus Chelsea, and then versus another team that I can't quite remember, probably City, actually. And I don't think that necessarily worked out in terms of being able to stifle the opponent. I kind of understand why you'd want to do it versus the City versus Chelsea. I was actually quite shocked when he played it versus Fulham. But actually playing it versus Liverpool made a lot of sense. And I just feel like because the results have been so good under that structure, I think that opens up an opportunity for Dango to get really good minutes, right? Because, of course, he was always the one who was hurt in these instances where Brentford were actually going to move towards a back three and actually have him, be a bench option and probably actually someone who would be subbing off Igor Thiago late into a game. The only thing is that Brentford's fixture run just isn't that good. So whilst Dango tends to have really good underlying stats and continue to have that when he actually had a start versus Liverpool, I just think that you better just wait and see how Brentford sort of line up as they go against some of these tougher games and see if Dango actually gets a larger piece of the pie going forwards. It's a bit of a shame that Shad is a little bit expensive within the game. I think he would be an extremely interesting option if he was a little bit better priced this season, but just to mention as to why Shad is not there. With Mitoma, it still seems like he's struggling from this injury. He wasn't a part of the squad versus Man United, so I feel like there still needs to be a massive asterisk over Mitoma, whereas Minte is actually one of my favorite options in the game. Part of this is also, as a set piece taker, we know he's going to get that sort of bonus impact as well, as someone who's probably the key sort of chance creator for this Brighton team. That, I think, lends itself to the same sort of conclusion. And also his NPXG numbers are relatively solid. They're not much better than last season, but actually when you look across this list in terms of how some of the players have played this season, I feel like you're still seeing even near the top, for example, that players like Foden, Bruno, Saka just don't have great NPXG, and maybe that's just the league overall getting a little bit better at defending overall. And as we said at the start of the season too, we're starting to see less goals, and potentially actually more of the goals being a piece of that pie are now set pieces. So maybe we just need to temper our expectations with how good an open play attacker is in 24 or in 25, 26. In the next tier, I've got Enzo, Sarr, and Njai at the top. I've actually added Sobo, and I've also, kept Rice at the tier that he's at as well. My only concern with Rice is this sort of injury situation with Arsenal, and that sort of maybe reduces his minutes potentially over this sort of medium to long-term run. Obviously, Rice has been amazing so far, but I'll just point out that I think Saka has all the benefits towards Rice if he's fit, right? The key thing with Saka is that he was injured. I'll talk about Saka in a moment. But both of them obviously have this set piece threat. Rice is probably a little bit better at actually delivering the set pieces because I don't think we've seen too many assists from Saka this season outside of Saka to Gabriel on one of those weeks. But, there is still the value there of actually getting, slightly more NPXG in general. And then also a little bit more open play value from Saka, whereas Rice has just been really consistent at a very fair price. Sobo, I think, is very similar in the sense that he's almost a different version of Rice, where he is now kind of like Liverpool's Valverde almost from Real Madrid, if anyone knows. He plays so many roles within the team. He is almost like an undisputed 90-minute player for this squad. And the big benefit, I think, of him actually playing more minutes within the midfield and Bradley spending more time in the right back position, allowing Sobo to play and stay in the midfield, is actually that Sobo, as someone who's a very good set-piece threat, is also very good at Seabrit. So his numbers have been really, really impressive from Seabrit, and I think that's something to sort of look at cautiously over, let's say, Game Week 13, or Game Week 12, rather. So whilst Liverpool might not be so interesting from Game Week 10 and 11, given the opponents that they have, and what's the home game, what's the away game, I think the key thing with Sobo is that if he's nailed the season, if he plays more minutes within the midfield as opposed to right back, and continues to sort of produce that Seabrit threat, and is a set-piece taker, for me, he's actually going to be one of the best value picks within the game. Now, going back to Enzo, Sarr, and Njai, I think Njai is just an extreme all-rounder. This is a really good season for him where he's actually improved a lot of his numbers, like even NPXG per 90. And the key thing, of course, as we can see, is that he's also very good at being able to come close towards the DEFCON almost every single match. And ultimately, he's a penalty taker. Everton might not get the same amount of penalties as some of the top teams in terms of attack, but I still think that, as you can see, the penalty value is still there. With Sarr and Enzo, it's actually a case of these are actually one of the best players so far this season when it comes to underlying stats and actually the kind of numbers that they've racked up. We also think that Enzo is on penalties, so I think that's a huge boost when you look at Chelsea's immediate fixture run. Crystal Palace have just come away from that toughest fixture possible and just simply have one of the cleanest runs within the Premier League, and they are actually still, I believe, the best attack in the Premier League this season when it comes to NPXG as a squad. So with Sarr being such a key focal point of this team alongside Mateta, and Yeremy Pino being, let's say, more of a creative type of piece, I think Sarr is just about to enter effectively a perfect run of games, right? So no real complaints about where these players are situated. I still think that Enzo, as long as Palmer's out, is just amazing. I think Sarr is amazing just in open play, and I think Njai is just one of the best all-rounders within the game, even despite Everton's fixture run slowly getting worse and worse and worse. With Kudus, I've actually given him a drop. As I mentioned last week, part of the reason why I dropped him the previous week was actually just because the open play value wasn't really quite there with Kudus. And I think when you compare, let's say, Kudus to someone like Njai, I don't think there's enough to say that there's similar value, right? Kudus is someone who has gotten a couple price rises. He probably has a worse fixture run compared to Njai. He doesn't do DEFCON, and he isn't on penalties. So I think from that kind of perspective and that sort of lens, I've also given Kudus another drop. In the next tier, I've given Gakpo a drop. Now, I have to say, I have sort of changed my mind a lot, and I tend to be quite cautious with how I sort of move Liverpool players because I completely understand that there's going to be a hierarchy and there's always going to be a change in terms of minutes. And of course, Salah takes a lot of those minutes within this Liverpool team. So I think that the only thing that I'll sort of mention that was a bit of a surprise to me was Gakpo being such an early substitution after being such a focal point of the team over the last 3-4 games, right? And I think the kind of confusion for me is, at which point Slot's going to change his behaviors in terms of importance of certain players, because I kind of thought that Gakpo would most likely actually get, once again, another 90-minute game, especially in a match that Liverpool were trying to chase and to win, right? So, everyone sort of responded to Wirtz getting subbed off for Gomez, the early Gakpo substitution. I don't think everything's quite all right with Liverpool. And yeah, unfortunately, I think if Gakpo can get subbed off within matches like that and in game states like that, then he just has to drop. I'll also apologize for just saying that I probably overread his minutes in terms of the Premier League. And yeah, I don't really know exactly what Slot is doing, but we'll just have to see going forwards. It is a bit strange because I think Gakpo has been such a key part of this team, at least in terms of if you look back at all the goals this season, how much he's produced, right? When you actually look at NPXGI for Liverpool this season, Gakpo has been far and above their best attacker. So it is quite surprising for him to actually still almost get stifled from a minutes perspective. But maybe I'm just missing something. With Gordon, I think the key thing that's just hurting him is once again just minutes. He did get 75 minutes in the previous match, but that's still not good enough. I think after the West Ham game, people might have a good reason to maybe move off of someone like Gordon, and I completely understand. I don't see him necessarily as an orange pick because still with the sort of minutes that he's getting, as long as he's getting consistent starts, I think he's always going to be someone who actually has a real good natural floor. Now, he hasn't provided anything in the Premier League, but he continues to score within the Champions League. And at the end of the day, he's still a penalty taker. So I think it's been a tough run with Gordon. I'm sure a lot of people who own him have been frustrated, but I still think he actually is decent value at this sort of price point. With Eze, I'm not going to overreact to, let's say, him scoring a goal off of that set piece from Arsenal. But, we know that Arsenal are probably the best team in the league, undisputedly. And eventually, someone's going to get goals, right, within the game. Like, for example, I don't know, Zubimendi can score a goal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be the best pick necessarily for a team like Arsenal, even though he's actually doing quite good because, of course, he had one of those massive hauls when he scored a brace earlier on in the season. And as it stands, a lot of the premium picks just haven't delivered so far. We haven't had, for example, an amazing Salah game yet. We haven't had an amazing Saka game yet. He probably could have had that versus Leeds, but got injured. So these kind of circumstances, I think, have all lended itself to maybe us overreacting in terms of who's actually gotten points so far. But I think I'm not going to overreact to, let's say, Eze's points because I still think his minutes aren't absolutely perfect. And then, of course, he doesn't have things like the set piece tools that Rice has or Saka has, or even the penalties potentially. Semenyo and Mbeumo, I think, are still top. I gave Mbeumo and Bruno a rise last week. I feel very much justified in keeping them there. I think Mbeumo is just fantastic right now. I think he's one of the best NPXG sort of players within the league. And this is no surprise because I think when you actually look at the kind of career of Mbeumo as a whole, last season was the season where we mentioned that there was a bit of a dip. And I think there was some people could have said that was worrying, but I think if anything, it almost looks like that was the one-off. And United, as we've said, are actually a very good offensive team this season, and Mbeumo is actually benefiting from a lot of this. Now, Cunha's not on this list, but I think Cunha definitely will be in this list within AFCON. So just something to mention there, where I just think that, especially with Mount being an injury sort of case at times, something to look forward to where you have a little bit more depth within this United team to actually spend money and transfers over, let's say, the next few weeks, even if Mbeumo has to go post-AFCON. But Mbeumo, for now, would be my pick of the lot. Foden, for me, is still at that sort of differential stage. I completely understand that Foden had one of his best games so far in terms of chances, in terms of, what he did within the Aston Villa match. But I still think overall, when you look at the piece of the pie of how Man City sort of have looked this season, I just think it's really hard to justify that Foden's one of the best picks within the game. I think the NPXG, the XAG numbers kind of reflect that. The shot numbers still reflect that, as even after, let's say, the post-Aston Villa game. So for me, the concern with Foden is actually, over these next few games, I probably wouldn't really want to own a City player anyways. I'd want to maximize on the fixtures of other teams. But Foden could still be interesting in Game Week 13, and maybe if things can change with City and we think they're somewhat better, we can reconsider Foden in a few game weeks' time. But for now, I don't think City are that impressive of a team. What has only been impressive so far is Erling Haaland. And then with Saka and Salah, I still have Saka top, and some people might actually think that this is me being biased, but I don't really think so. I think at the end of the day, Saka has all the tools needed to be a very, very good pick within FPL. At the same time, yeah, I can completely recognize that this season so far, within the limited sample size, he hasn't had any NPXG whatsoever, really, compared to some of the top picks. But I think that that's more a symptom of, unfortunately, how he's been, coming in and out of injury, playing sick, for example, in the previous match. I would just think that a fully fit Saka is going to produce a lot of value within the game, and I have no sort of fear in terms of him actually, I guess, staying at this level of being someone who's at 0.1 NPXG per 90. That's just my thoughts. I'm sure you can disagree, but I just think Saka is still really good value. And we'll talk about, let's say, triple Arsenal defense as a core structure as well in a minute. But I think it's still okay, for example, to persist with the Saka structure, because Saka's value going forwards might actually also be that he's a very good captaincy pick, because as people don't own Salah currently, and people tend to just own the Haaland-only draft structure, Haaland will still have some worse fixtures, right? When we talk about, for example, Newcastle away in Game Week 13, or 12 rather. And so that's a good opportunity to consider someone like a Saka captaincy. So I think having an Arsenal player there is very interesting. And on the contrary, you probably wouldn't have, let's say, someone like Gabriel as a captaincy option on somewhere like Game Week 12. So that's why I think Saka still has some value within the game, and that it's not so simple to just say that triple Arsenal defense is like the only way you can play FPL right now to get points. With the FPL forward tier, I've given Gu a drop because Delap is already back in training, and I really think his performance last match was really poor. But with Krupi, I think it just comes down to, when is Evan Nilsson coming back into the team? Unfortunately, the next 2 games for Bournemouth are really, really poor. So you're not really going to want, let's say, to start Krupi. But it might be the case that Krupi can still, for example, find his way to getting minutes in Gameweek 12, at which point, with the West Ham game and a really good run of games for Bournemouth, he can be an interesting pick for a lot of managers. Foster's interesting, but Burnley's fixture run is just terrible. Calvert-Lewin I've given a drop because the fixture run's completely ended now for Leeds. I think this is going to be a big sort of testing run for Leeds, because for teams like Leeds and Sunderland, and I think Sunderland still have a good game here in Game Week 10. But the key thing for these 2 teams is, of course, they've gotten so many points to the board. I think they've actually almost gotten themselves out of the relegation picture, if I can be honest. And the only thing for them to prove is, how consistently good they are. Now, of course, Sunderland are an amazing spot within the league table, even Leeds towards an extent, and they've got actually really good results in terms of underlyings. But I think that the key thing for these 2 teams, as I said, for me to look forward to is how good their attacks are. Because up until this point, their defenses have been better than their attack. And I think that's sort of the view at which I would sort of look at these teams and why they're strong. In the next tier, at the 6 million tier, I think we have a lot of value here in Thiago and Welbeck. Now, I think Thiago has more than exceeded expectations. I personally, I own Thiago, for example, in Wildcard 4, right? So I fully am aware that Thiago's a good player. But I think my concern with Thiago's has always been, let's say, the minutes under Keith Andrews and what tactical setups are going to hurt someone like Thiago. Now, it still seems like, as I said, my intonation is that I think it seems like they're going to play more of the sort of front 3 structure and actually maybe be a little bit more dominant on the ball. But that just makes Thiago as a better pick, right? So I am now jealous of people who own Thiago, and I think he's gotten 2 price rises since, but a very solid pick, and on penalties, just confirmed within the previous match versus Liverpool. So for me, he is arguably someone who's completely fixture-proof now, because at this sort of price point, we just haven't really seen anyone like Calvert-Lewin or Isidore or even Strand Larson actually get consistent value every single match in terms of being able to get NPXG. So when you kind of look at, for example, Strand Larson, he's had a shocking season non-pen. Isidore doesn't have necessarily the minutes that we want, and then Thiago also has penalties. Whereas, let's say, with Calvert-Lewin, of course, we need to apply also an NPXG tax to him, and we're aware of that. With Welbeck, though, I think the reason why he gets a rise is, of course, the numbers are really good for Welbeck, and the minutes have been really good for Welbeck. And he also has like little things like, for example, potentially still is on penalties, maybe, if Milner's off the pitch. At the same time, he takes direct free kicks, like he can score versus United, which was extremely impressive. That was a great strike, I think, left-footed. And so I think when you look at someone like Welbeck, the key thing to kind of ask going forwards is, can he sustain himself? Can he stay fit? Because we've always seen issues with Welbeck where he comes in and out of, injuries during the season, and you don't really get the sort of the nod by Fabian Hurtzler. So there's always the chance that Welbeck can be hurt, and you can get hurt by Fabian not sort of disclosing information at the right times. But I think Welbeck's actually a fantastic, fantastic pick. So given that the run starts here with Leeds at home, I think this is just a great run of games for Brighton. So to me, I think Welbeck's actually a very interesting buy. And compared to Thiago, I think from a fixtures point of view, you can certainly argue that Welbeck's a better pick right now. In the next tier, I've actually given Sesko a very moderate rise. I still think that the issue is going to be, if Mount's, let's say, fit and he's a part of the team, how that's going to hurt someone like Sesko's minutes. But for now, obviously, with Mount being out, that just means Sesko's a very, very good pick within the game. I think he's also showing that he's more than capable of playing within the team. I really like the assist that he actually provided for, let's say, the Mbeumo goal. So yeah, I mean, there's not much to really be said about Sesko other than he's playing for a very strong attack at this moment in time. Doesn't have penalties, but you can probably enjoy quite a lot from this United team at this moment, just from the attacking point of view. As far as João Pedro, he gets a drop. I think the numbers are just shocking, right? I think like when you look at, honestly, these NPXG numbers, they're probably worse than they've ever been within his career. The XAG is okay, but that just shows that he's a different profile. He's literally reversed out of position. And Enzo is now almost forcing a 9 to play up front, even if it has to be Mark Gu. And now with Delap coming back, that can improve things in terms of, even João Pedro can probably benefit playing off of a better 9. But for João Pedro independently as an FPL pick, I don't think that's really good value. So I feel like even though the fixture run is so good for Chelsea, I have to give him a drop because the numbers are that shocking. And then also Enzo's mentioned that he's been playing with an injury, and clearly he's looked worse than he, has so far. Now, I also have to say, I've never owned João Pedro this season. I've been scared of João Pedro. His ownership has been extremely high. He scored a lot of goals from set pieces, which I think a lot of people did overreact to. But, did I expect him to be this poor? Probably not. With Gyökeres, I think he also gets a fall as well. I think we've had more than enough games now to probably say that the NPXG that he's actually racked up thus far isn't really good enough for an Arsenal attacker. Now, when you actually look at someone like Isak as well, I mean, he struggled too. So it's not like that this is, endemic of someone like Gyökeres. I think generally across the league this season, we're starting to see that a lot of center forwards have struggled, whereas actually other players like Mateta and Haaland have almost gone from strength to strength, or someone like Waltermat still has a lot of big chances per match, or Welbeck even. So yeah, I mean, this is a game where I feel like the forward pool has radically dropped, but that's not a problem. We just play within it, and I think there's, we were never going to have more forwards than we have midfielders, so I think it's okay to have a little bit less diversity within the forwards. In the defense, the only thing that I've added is just Hartman from Burnley. I mean, Quincy has just been amazing this season in terms of open play value, in terms of the XAG. Someone from Leeds or someone from Sunderland. In the next tier, I've given Anderson an asterisk, but I think it actually seems quite likely that he'll miss out in Gameweek 10. He's definitely not going to be a part of the Fulham team for the AFL Cup match. But regardless, I think even despite this, I think he's a very easy hold, because, for example, Gameweek 11 still, that's a really nice match for someone like Anderson. So I don't think there's really a need to be extremely concerned with someone like Anderson, but just something to mention. As far as Keane, I still think he's a solid pick. I think Everton actually have some good fixtures. He also gets good DEFCON, so I think you're never going to feel too bad about owning an Everton defender at this sort of price point. As far as Richards, this is going to be Crystal Palace's great run of games. He's not exactly one of the best set-piece threats within the team, but I think just at the price point that he's at the DEFCON value that he's at, he still remains fantastic. Truffet actually had a wonderful match last match. I think, and of course, because of the specific sort of tactical matchup, Truffet actually ended up getting DEFCON, where Senesi was nowhere close. That's not going to happen very often, but it just shows you that he's much better value than Diakite, who also unfortunately just didn't get to play within that match, probably because of how, let's say, Bournemouth wanted to set up versus a much more physical Nottingham Forest team. So that's why I've taken Diakite off the cheat sheet, whereas Truffet just remains potentially incredible value within a 4.5, and I think probably one of the more neglected picks within the game. Van Heck just provides value at 4.4. I don't think there's too much else to be said. I think that Brighton, for example, are still a much better team than, let's say, a team like West Ham, where I've taken off all their assets, because I just think, unfortunately, West Ham are getting from weakness to weakness almost, as opposed to what we probably thought would have been strength to strength. So yeah, in the next tier, Senesi I still think is top. This is because I still think, okay, Senesi has two bad fixtures in games 10 and 11, but similar to Truffet, you're not really going to move Senesi off your team. Now, unless you have a really interesting angle here to, let's say, move Senesi towards, I don't know, an Arsenal defender, or maybe even a Daniel Munoz, I understand the value of it, but I think Senesi is just one of the best picks within the game, and as soon as Game Week 12 rolls around, you probably want him again. With Guehi, this is a great run for Palace, so nothing else to be said. I mean, it's just shocking how good the numbers have been for Guehi this season in terms of set pieces. Like, this is mostly just set piece value. I know he's also scored like an open play goal versus Aston Villa, but just incredible. With Burn, he's probably still the most nailed player within this Newcastle team, but I can understand why someone would want to move towards, let's say, a Thiaw as well, because especially Botman is injured, so I think Thiaw actually should be within the cheat sheet. But I still think Burn gives you the sort of most nailed value within the game, and that's a big plus. Chalobah gets a drop because I am actually a bit concerned with that really poor performance versus Sunderland. I just think that he has a slightly higher propensity to getting benched going forwards, and we'll just need to monitor that situation. Also, Chelsea's underlying stats this season in terms of their defense has actually been quite poor, so I think it's just a reflection of that as well. Lacroix, I still really like him. I feel a little bit harsh putting him at where he's at, but I think when you kind of think about what Guehi's producing, when you think about what Richards is producing, I don't think there's much of a justification to say that Lacroix should be a green pick. As far as Van de Ven, I mean, amazing haul for people who own him, so congratulations to you if you play him, but the Tottenham fixture run is absolutely awful, and even though he's one of the best set piece threats within the league, I still think that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be a good option in the cheat sheet. I'm not going to hindsight this. That's just my thoughts. In the next tier, I've given Tarkowski a drop. I just think that at the sort of price point, it's probably not really worth it, to be honest, at this moment now. I might have actually done this last week, but I actually thought Tottenham at home was a really, really good game, and now it's not, and now Sunderland away looks like a much rougher game, so that's why I've given Tarkowski a drop. And then Saliba, obviously, with the uncertainty, also gets a drop too. So moving on towards the goalkeepers now. The only thing I've actually changed is I've added Rose as a rise, and I think Sunderland actually just generally have an okay fixture run. Leeds, I think, have a much worse run. And Rose has actually been a really good shot stopper so far this season, so quite shocking, but unsurprising given where Sunderland are at and the results that they've actually gotten, despite not necessarily the best performances in terms of the sort of net XG. But yeah, that's why Rose gets a rise. All the other changes here, I've been quite hesitant to sort of make because, for example, with Leno, I just think Fulham have been really poor. Even against my own expectations and the previous sort of season history as well, and how I previously rated Fulham. I just don't feel the confidence, even though the fixture run's a lot better now, to actually give him a rise. Vicario's been wonderful, but I think this is still, once again, a really poor fixture run for a team like Tottenham, so I feel hesitant to sort of give him a rise, even though he's been an absolute demon in terms of shot stopping recently. And other than that, I think that the cheat sheet's at a pretty good spot. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.